Good morning once again, everyone. I'm very, very thankful that you all could join me every single day. Thank you very much. We left off in 1 Samuel 2 last time, where God was promising to raise up a faithful priest unto him, whom was going to replace Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas, Eli's two sons. Now we come upon 1 Samuel 3. And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. Up until this time, they had had judges in Israel, but there was no prophets. There were no people like Moses speaking unto. There's really not been a prophet like Samuel whenever he comes on the scene, except for Moses. That's how important that Samuel truly is. And after him comes all the big ones: Jeremiah, Isaiah, Elijah, Elisha, and Daniel. All of these big ones come after Samuel. And it came to pass at that time, when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see. And ere the lamp of God, meaning before, and before the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep. What this means right here, this doesn't literally mean the lights within the tabernacle. It just means the lamp of God, meaning the sun went down and nighttime came. Where the ark of God came, Samuel was laid down to sleep. That the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. Now catch this. He ran unto Eli and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not, lie down again. And he went and lay down again. The voice of the Lord, whenever he spoke to Samuel, and I've told this to people so many times, people who claim that they hear from God through their thoughts. They believe every thought is from the Lord. I used to have this very same problem where especially whenever you're in kind of still growing in grace and in knowledge and wisdom, you don't quite understand that that's not how God talks to people. He's never talked to people. I've made entire videos about this one subject. It was an audible voice that called out, an audible voice that only he could hear. But it sounded just like Eli. It sounded just like him. He thought it was Eli. And remember, Eli being blind and of old age and fat, he probably thought that he may have needed his assistance, so he got up very quickly. And the Jewish traditions, the sources believe that Samuel was around 12 years old at this time, right around the time of like a Jewish boy's bar mitzvah and so forth. But it actually sounded like this: Samuel, Samuel. It didn't sound like a thought, some abstract thing. And the Lord called yet again, Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son, lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. You'll notice how Hophni and Phinehas, it says how they didn't know the Lord, but they were evil exceedingly. But it says right here, Samuel being a young child, it says that he didn't know the Lord either. And it goes to show you how a good kid and a bad kid aren't necessarily indicators of knowing God or not. Neither one. None of these three knew the Lord. And still Samuel he was nice, he was obedient, he served others, everyone loved him. And this goes right to atheists and agnostics and all these other false religious people, how they believe that if you're nice enough, you'll go to heaven. Well, Samuel didn't know the Lord, and he was still a really good kid. Okay, so it takes a whole lot more than just being nice. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Eli starting to catch on. He says, Oh, okay, it's apparently God, because Eli, he's not aware of this. I don't think that the Lord's ever talked to Eli, because God had to send another man of God in order to speak to Eli. And I believe that speaks an awful lot about Eli's relationship with God. I believe that he had good intentions, but I don't believe that God was well pleased enough with him in order to speak to him face to face, if you will. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Then a very interesting thing is said, And the Lord came and stood, and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. But then the Lord came and stood, and called as at other times. Now that's a very intriguing phrase right there, okay? Because we're talking about Jehovah, the great God. And what I believe that its meaning is, because they are part of the tabernacle, I believe that something happened within the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord appeared in there. Okay, that's my assumption. And the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of every one that heareth it shall tingle. This is a frightening, frightening verse. There are a couple of other instances, and one, Jeremiah and 2 Kings actually speaks about these ears tingling whenever they hear of the calamity to come. And say, Hear ye the word of the Lord, Jeremiah 19. O kings of Judah, and inhabitants of Jerusalem, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will bring evil upon this place for thee, which whosoever heareth, his ears shall tingle. This is all three instances where this tingle is mentioned. It's not a good sign. And it has the connotation is that of, it will be such striking judgment whenever they hear about what happens, and whenever they hear about what will happen, that their ears will literally involuntarily tingle. It's much like how some people, whenever they get really scared, how their teeth will chatter. It's like that. It's an involuntary reaction to something a little overwhelming for the body, so the body has to act in a manner in which to kind of get it out. In that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. That is where Eli messed up. He restrained them not. He didn't put a stop to it. So their evil deeds are on their head, but his evil come from not stopping the evil. And I believe that goes to where the people in whom take inaction is an action. Inaction against evil is an action of evil in and of itself. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli, that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever. And what God is doing right here is he's reiterating, and he's giving an extra amount of warning and predict and prophesying against Eli. Something that the man of God had already told him. He is making it a certainty now. And it's believed in the commentaries, because Samuel is receiving the same message as the man of God prior to this in 1 Samuel 2. Because he's receiving the same message, that there may have been a time to repent in between there. There may have been just a few days or a few weeks or something in order to repent. And because he didn't, now this is conjecture, but maybe because there was no repentance, because Eli didn't try to fix the problem, then God said, okay, I'm going to send it to Samuel now, and That's it. That's final. There's no more. I don't have to warn him again. And Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he answered, Here am I. Now Samuel doesn't want to tell him this. And he said, What is the thing that the Lord hath said unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, pay attention, God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me, of all the things that he said unto thee. So he already knows it's bad tidings. He already knows that it's something bad, because he gives him this stern warning. He says, God do to you what he told you he is going to do to me. That I think that he already knows. I think Eli already knows. And Samuel told him every whit, everything, and hid nothing from him. And he said, It is the Lord. Let him do what seemeth him good. So Eli does take the appropriate measures, and he reacts in the appropriate manner in stating, whatever the Lord chooses to do, let him do. I guess because he has no real other choice in the matter, but it's also showing a repentant heart, or at least a saddened heart of Eli. It shows how he's just saddened. He does love the Lord, but he knows also that he's messed up and that there's no going back. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. It's talking again about how the glory of God now is coming back into the tabernacle. Now we're coming upon 1 Samuel 4:1, and this is some time later. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out against the Philistines to battle, and pitched beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines pitched in Aphek. Right here is the land that the Philistines had. It was to the west of Israel. So the Philistines, there was no major world empires at this time. Egypt was still trying to build up their resources again because God had crushed them. And even though this was hundreds of years later, they still were not a major power. There was no Assyria to worry about, no Chaldeans to worry about, Babylonians, if you will, and there was none of that. So it was the neighboring nations that Israel had to fight with, contend with. But if you'll notice right up here, the Philistines pitched in the land of Aphek, or in the place of Aphek, and Aphek bordered right on. It was just right on the edge, right before they could get near Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle was. And right here is where they believe that Ebenezer was located. They still aren't 100% certain, but they believe that it was just a short ways away from Aphek, not just a few miles, if at the most. And interestingly enough, just a small little note about the Philistines at this time. The Philistines were the hardest, most advanced of the enemies of Israel at this time. They could contend with the other neighboring tribes, but the Philistines were a difficult bunch because had descended, they had came out of the Greek lands, more specifically Crete, the island of Crete, right down here. And it's not as small as it looks. Now, right here would have been Sparta. Right here's Athens. Right here would have been Corinth, Macedonia. You got all kinds of them. Did just round up in here at Thessalonica. But you have all of those round up in there. And then you have Crete as part of the Greek lands. And they would have migrated over here to the land of Canaan, even back into the time of Abraham. So this was a long, they've been there for a while, but only within the last 100 years had they been growing and advancing militarily. So the Philistines, they had taken their battle, even their armor, their swords, their shields, their helmets, everything was that of they knew from Greece. So they were much more advanced. They they knew how to mold metals much better, specifically iron, I believe. But they were very, very difficult bunch to fight and kill. But Samson, he had to fight against them. So we know that they have fought against them before. They have a history with these people. But now, this is the most hopeless, dire time in Israel's history up until this point. Throughout the time of Joshua and Judges, they were building, growing, they were fighting, they were winning. This is at probably the most hopeless time in all the Israelites' history up until this point. And their priests are corrupt, but now is God bringing up Samuel. And this God always does this. There's always that one man in whom God will raise up, or men and women, whomever. God will always find a way to preserve that which is his. And he does it in the smallest manner possible, the most subtle of all manners. He does it in the way that you would never guess. And the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 Israelites. So they lose 4,000 people in this battle. So obviously the Philistines overcame them easily. And when the people were coming to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies." So these Israelites say, well, if we take the ark of God out of the Holy of Holies and bring it out, because that had been done before. Moses commanded it to be done. Joshua at Jericho, Saul. So we have seen this happen before, but it was during an appropriate time, and and God had willed them to do it. Now at this time right here, God never told them to do this. These were a pagan people. They were very, very close to pagan, if not outright pagan, and the way that they looked at God. They treated God as a utility God. Leonard Ravenhill used to say that all the time. Well, we'll go to God whenever we need him. And we see this a lot with Christians. They don't want anything really to do with God, and they just want to go to heaven. That's it. They don't want to go to hell after this life. But they never do pray. They never do read their Bible. They never listen to preachers. They never give God any attention whatsoever. They don't care anything about God. They never think about him. Then all of a sudden they get struck with cancer, or they lose a family member, or a calamity happens like the Israelites are going through. Suddenly they remember God, and most of the time they're angry at him, but it's the only time that they really run to him as a last resort. So we're seeing that with the people right here. So the people were sent to Shiloh, that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth between the cherubims, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth rang again. Now, the Philistines heard this shout, which we'll see in this next verse. They had heard this shout. They heard them rejoicing that the ark was with them. You'll see this happen in a lot of churches. They get really, really happy, really excited. You can hear them from across the street, and you just think to yourself, man, that church, and they're all thinking that the Holy Ghost is with them. They're all going crazy, passing out and all that. Now, I'm not against doing that. I'm not. There is a time to get really, really happy, and sometimes the Lord's Spirit is moving, and people are really excited. Nothing wrong with getting excited. Nothing wrong with being happy. But because what we see, David, he dances and sings before the ark whenever it's in his vicinity. We see that, and his wife at that time scolds him for doing such. But So I'm not against that, but like a lot of churches, they believe that the happier they are and the crazier they act and all of this, and they believe that it's God in the midst. Quite oftentimes, the happiest moments that I have to think about God from personal experience, they bring me to tears. They bring me to my knees because I know that I'm just not. I know I'm unworthy of such good things, and Spurgeon said something to that effect too. He said usually those quiet moments of joy completely rapturing you to the point where you can't shout for joy because you have so much joy and you know you're so unworthy of it. It's those moments whenever you're the happiest with God. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, "What meaneth the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews?" And they understood that the ark of the Lord was come into the camp. And the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "God is come into the camp." And they said, "Woe unto us, for there hath not been such a thing heretofore. Woe unto us, who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Be strong, and quit yourselves like men. O ye Philistines, that ye be not servants unto the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Quit yourselves like men, and fight." And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent. And there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. Now, as you'll see, before they had brought the ark into the camp, they lost 4,000 men. Now that they have the ark in the battle, they lose 30,000 footmen. 30,000. That's quite a few more. And they must have wondered why. They must have thought, why is this happening? In all the Hollywood movies that have to do with demonic possession and exorcisms, like in the movie The Exorcist, they'll take crosses. These Catholics do. They take crosses. They got these the rosary beads and such. They got all this holy water, and they got all these things that they're using, these physical objects that they're using, and it's like almost like good luck charms, almost, and it's superstitious. And Paul says, stay away from superstitions. Don't have anything to do with those. One recent controversy was by one of these activists, these Black Lives Matter activists over here in America. Man, his name is Sean King. He's one of the big names within it. Sean King calls on protesters to tear down racist statues of white Jesus. So he's calling on them to tear down these statues of Jesus. And whenever I first heard that, and it's the same as now, not a big deal to me. Tear them down. That doesn't bother me in the least. You're not going to affect my Jesus any more than, if anything, it's kind of idolatry to me. And I don't think that Christians should have big statues of Christ, but it's just like these pagan worshipers, how they put so much faith in these physical objects whenever it's the unseen that matters. We walk by faith, not by sight. So the problem in this battle was that they had the ark of God, but they didn't have the God of the ark fighting with them. They didn't care anything about God. They only cared about the ark. The ark had become God to them whenever it was just a representation of his throne, of his temple in heaven. I mean, people will worship anything. Do you not remember how King Hezekiah had to tear down the bronze serpent because people began to worship the bronze serpent that Moses had formed? They'll worship anything. Right here, back in 2007, Kathy Griffin had won an Emmy for, I think, her show back then. And she says this.
A lot of people come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me a bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is, suck it, Jesus, this award is my God now.
Do you see how little people actually fear God? I mean, it's insanity. But people, they worship anything and everything besides God. Anything and everything. It doesn't matter. and even good things, such as the ark of God. Even good things can be worshipped besides God, and that's what they were doing. They were worshiping the ark instead of God. And the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. One of the earliest extra biblical evidences that we have, that we found, is relating to this very event. It's very, very old, and it's right around the same time that all of these events began to happen. This war with the Philistines, the ark taken, Hophni and Phinehas dying. Ancient Ostracon records ark's wanderings. The Isbet Sarta Ostracon may be the earliest extra-biblical source that names a biblical personality and supplements the Bible's account of a historical event. So, it's not in the Bible whatsoever, but we have found a piece of evidence that proves what happened back then. And an ostracon is basically a potsherd that they would take and write on. But right here it is. This is a replica of it, of course. It's just showing what was written on it. And you may say, well, how in the world is that? Because it's written in ancient Hebrew script. So it's a language that not many would know at this point. But it says this on it. The top line says, "Unto the field we came, unto Aphek from Shiloh. The Kittim took it and came to Azor, to Dagon, lord of Ashdod, and to Gath. It returned to Kiriath Jearim. The companion of the foot soldiers, Hophni, came to tell the elders, a horse has come, and upon it was my brother for us to bury." And the fifth line is just the alphabet. Okay, it's like an alphabet going over. But right here, in this, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, archaeological findings that we have of proving biblical accounts, it actually not only mentions the Philistines, it mentions Dagon, and whom is the Philistine god, which we'll learn about here just a couple chapters, 1 or 2 chapters. But it also mentions where they took the ark, and it was recovered 7 months later. But it also mentions Hophni. And it tells us a little bit more than the biblical account does, because it says that Phinehas, his brother, died before him. Apparently what had happened was Phinehas and Hophni, they both went into this battle following the ark, and Phinehas died. They got him out of the battle, and Hophni runs back, tells the camp that his brother's dead, goes back into the battle, and then he dies. And there ran a man of Benjamin out of the army, and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes rent, and with earth upon his head. And when he came, lo, Eli sat upon a seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told it, all the city cried out. And when Eli heard the noise of the crying, he said, What meaneth the noise of this tumult? And the man came in hastily and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were dim, that he could not see. And the man said unto Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. And he said, What is there done, my son? And the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, and there hath been also a great slaughter among the people. And thy 2 sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God is taken. It's just been brutal news, and it's on an unhealthy man, first of all, a blind man, and an old man, all in one. He's fat. Eli is a heavy man. He's also blind, and he's also nearly 100 years old. He just can't take this kind of news. But it happened just as God would say. They both died in the same day. And it came to pass, when he made mention of the ark of God, that he fell from off the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. So even he died that very same day, his sons and him, in one swoop. And in Psalm 78, you can read how it was God doing all of this. God is the one that allowed them to go into the battle. And it even says that they destroyed Shiloh that day. Shiloh was also destroyed. So this was just a day of tremendous terror. Everything was fine, and all of a sudden, everything is just not fine. Everything's actually dead, burnt, buried, or stolen. And his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, near to be delivered. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women that stood by her said unto her, Fear not, for thou hast borne a son. But she answered not, neither did she regard it. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, The glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. Everything's gone. Her whole family's dead. Everybody's dead. And now she dies. And she said, The glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. You see, now this is a physical representation, a physical showing to the Israelites where God had been all these years. God wasn't with them for years and years, as a matter of fact. It was only because it says that he only had returned. They believe that the ark has now been taken, therefore God is not with them anymore. God hasn't been with them for a long, long, long time, in the sense of blessing them and aiding them in their, no, because they had turned from him long ago. But he is with one, and that is Samuel. Okay, but now that they're actually seeing what God, where God is from them, now whenever they see it for themselves, what the spirit world has been doing for years and years, they all go into utter shock. It traumatizes them to know this. And I fear on Judgment Day, Jesus says that there'll be weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. Depart from me, I never knew ye. And they'll say, Lord, Lord, did we not do these wonderful works in your name? And in these names did we not cast out devils and such? And he'll say, Depart from me. And I believe the very same type of shock, magnified 1,000,000 times, will be upon those people in Judgment Day as what's being experienced right here. They'll believe that God is for them, God is for them, God is for them. Then they die. And they realize suddenly God was never for them. A shocking, shocking turn of events. But maybe tomorrow we'll be getting into 1 Samuel 5, Lord willing. Until then, God of all peace be with you. Amen.